Grandma Elena, Daddy's taking money that isn't his. My 10-year-old grandson Marcus whispered these words while tugging on my sleeve during what I thought was a peaceful Sunday family barbecue. His small face was etched with the kind of worry that no child should carry, and his eyes darted nervously toward his father, who was laughing loudly with his friends near the grill. I knelt down to Marcus's level, brushing a strand of his dark hair from his forehead, thinking this was just another case of childhood misunderstanding about adult finances. But then he pulled out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, and everything I thought I knew about my son changed forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon had started like any other family gathering at my home in Riverside, California. I had spent the morning preparing my famous tres leches cake and arranging fresh flowers from my garden around the patio. At 63, I still took pride in hosting these monthly barbecues that brought together 3 generations of the Morales family. The scent of carne asada filled the air as my son Diego manned the grill, his wife Carmen setting up folding chairs while their 2 children played in the sprinkler system I had installed specifically for these occasions. I owned Morales Family Bakery, a business I had built from scratch 30 years ago after immigrating from Guadalajara with nothing but recipes passed down from my grandmother and an unshakable determination to succeed. The bakery had grown from a small storefront in downtown Riverside to 3 locations across the Inland Empire, providing not just for my family but for dozens of employees who had become like extended family over the years. The success had allowed me to purchase this comfortable home with its large backyard, perfect for family gatherings, and to accumulate savings that I hoped would provide security for my children and grandchildren. Diego had always been my pride and joy, the first in our family to graduate from college, earning a business degree that I thought would help him understand the value of hard work and financial responsibility. He worked as an operations manager for a logistics company, a job that paid well enough to support his family's comfortable lifestyle in their suburban home 20 minutes away. Carmen worked part-time as a dental hygienist, and together they seemed to be living the American dream I had worked so hard to make possible for the next generation. But lately, something had felt different about Diego. He had been asking more questions about the bakery's finances, showing unusual interest in my retirement planning, and making comments about how I was getting older and might need help managing my affairs. These conversations always made me uncomfortable. Not because I was sensitive about aging, but because they felt calculating in a way that was unlike the son I had raised. When he suggested I add him as a co-signer on my business accounts, for emergency purposes, I had politely declined, explaining that I had already established appropriate legal safeguards with my attorney. The tension had escalated 3 weeks earlier when Diego had arrived at my house unannounced with a folder full of documents and a man he introduced as a financial advisor. They wanted to discuss optimizing my portfolio and ensuring proper estate planning for tax efficiency. The meeting felt rehearsed, with Diego and the advisor finishing each other's sentences and presenting charts that seemed designed more to confuse than clarify. They wanted me to consolidate my various accounts into a single investment fund that the advisor would manage, with Diego as the designated beneficiary and co-trustee. The pressure tactics were subtle but unmistakable. And when I asked for time to review everything with my own attorney, Diego's friendly demeanor had cracked slightly, revealing an impatience that troubled me deeply. Now, as I looked down at Marcus holding that crumpled paper, I remembered how quiet he had been during that financial meeting, sitting in the corner with his tablet while the adults talked. Children often absorbed more than we realized, and his serious expression suggested he had understood something important that the adults had missed or chosen to ignore. "What do you mean, mijo?" I asked gently, using the Spanish endearment that always made him smile. But this time, Marcus didn't smile. Instead, he glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully unfolded the paper he had been clutching. It was a printed bank statement, but not one I recognized. The header read, Morales Family Trust Account, with an account number I had never seen before. My heart began to race as I scanned the document, seeing my name listed as the primary account holder and Diego listed as the authorized user. The statement showed a balance of over $200,000, with regular deposits that seemed to correspond with dates when I had made cash deposits at my own bank. There were also withdrawals, large ones, going to accounts and companies I didn't recognize. My hands began to tremble as I realized what I was looking at. Someone had opened an account in my name, been depositing money that should have been going to my legitimate accounts, and was systematically withdrawing funds for purposes I had never authorized. "Where did you get this, Marcus?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of laughter and conversation from the barbecue. Marcus looked toward his father again, then back at me with eyes that seemed far too old for his 10 years. "I was looking for my soccer cleats in Daddy's office last week, and I found a whole box of papers with your name on them. This one fell out when I was moving the box. Daddy has been talking on the phone a lot about money, and he always gets mad when he thinks I'm listening." The implications crashed over me like a wave. Diego had been intercepting my deposits, redirecting them to an account he controlled, and using my money for his own purposes. The financial advisor meeting hadn't been about helping me, it had been about legitimizing his access to even more of my assets. My own son, the child I had sacrificed everything to educate and support, was stealing from me in the most calculated and sophisticated way imaginable. I folded the bank statement carefully and slipped it into my purse, my mind racing through the possibilities. How long had this been going on? How much money was involved? What other accounts or financial instruments had been created without my knowledge? Most importantly, what was I going to do about it? Confronting Diego directly could lead to a family explosion that would traumatize Marcus and his younger sister, Sophia. But allowing the theft to continue was unthinkable, especially when it involved money that was meant to secure not just my future, but the legitimate inheritance of my grandchildren. "Marcus, you did the right thing by showing me this," I said, pulling him into a hug that I hoped conveyed both my gratitude and my determination to protect him from whatever was coming next. "But I need you to promise me something very important. Don't tell anyone else about this paper or about our conversation, okay? Sometimes grown-ups have to handle difficult things in special ways, and I need to figure out the best way to take care of this situation." Marcus nodded solemnly, his small arms wrapping around my neck with a trust that broke my heart. Here was a child who had stumbled upon evidence of his father's crimes and had chosen to protect his grandmother rather than remain silent out of family loyalty. The courage and moral clarity of his actions stood in stark contrast to Diego's calculated betrayal, and I knew that whatever happened next, I had to ensure that Marcus and Sophia were protected from the consequences of their father's choices. The rest of the barbecue passed in a surreal haze. I went through the motions of serving food, chatting with family members, and admiring.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The children's artwork from school, but my mind was entirely focused on the bank statement hidden in my purse and the growing list of questions that demanded answers. Diego seemed unusually attentive, complimenting my cooking more than usual and making jokes that felt forced. Carmen appeared genuinely relaxed and happy, which suggested she was either an accomplished actress or genuinely unaware of her husband's activities. I watched their interactions carefully, looking for signs of deception or guilt, but Diego's performance was flawless. As the afternoon wore on, I began to notice things that had previously seemed innocent, but now took on sinister significance. Diego's expensive new watch, which he had claimed was a bonus from work. Carmen's recent comments about their upcoming vacation to Europe, a trip that seemed extravagant for their supposed income level. The casual way Diego had been asking about my banking habits, my daily routines, and my relationships with my attorney and accountant. Each observation added another piece to a puzzle that painted a picture of systematic financial abuse disguised as family concern. When the guests began to leave, Diego lingered longer than usual, helping me clean up while Marcus and Sophia played in the backyard. "Mama, I've been thinking more about our conversation from last month," he said while loading dishes into my dishwasher. "The financial advisor I introduced you to has some really innovative ideas about maximizing returns on your investments. I know you wanted to talk to your attorney first, but the opportunity he presented has a limited window. Maybe we could schedule another meeting this week?" The casual pressure, delivered while he was performing the helpful gesture of cleaning my kitchen, felt even more manipulative now that I knew about the secret account. Diego was attempting to fast-track my agreement to financial arrangements that would presumably give him even greater access to my assets. all while maintaining the facade of a caring son looking out for his mother's best interests. The sophistication of his approach suggested this wasn't impulsive behavior, but a carefully planned campaign of financial exploitation. "I'm still reviewing everything with my attorney," I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the anger building in my chest. "These kinds of decisions shouldn't be rushed, especially at my age. I want to make sure I understand all the implications before making any changes to arrangements that have served me well for 30 years. Diego's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that I might have missed if I hadn't been watching so carefully. "Of course, Mama. I just want to make sure you're getting the best possible advice. Your current attorney is great for basic business issues, but estate planning and investment management require specialized expertise. The advisor I found has credentials from some of the top financial institutions in the country." The implication that my longtime attorney was somehow inadequate felt like another manipulation tactic, designed to undermine my confidence in my existing support network and make me more dependent on Diego's recommendations. It was a classic strategy used by financial predators: isolate the victim from their trusted advisors and create dependency on the perpetrator's chosen experts. The fact that my own son was employing these techniques against me felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than the simple theft of money. After Diego's family finally left, I sat in my kitchen with the bank statement spread out on the table, studying every detail and trying to piece together the scope of what had been done to me. The account had been opened 18 months earlier, which meant Diego had been planning this operation for far longer than I had suspected. The deposit pattern suggested he had access to information about my banking schedule and had been systematically intercepting funds that should have gone to my legitimate accounts. The withdrawal patterns were equally revealing. Large sums had been transferred to something called Morales Investment Holdings, which I had never heard of, but which was presumably another entity Diego had created to launder the stolen money. Other withdrawals went to luxury purchases, travel expenses, and what appeared to be investment in speculative ventures that I would never have approved. My son had essentially been living a double life, maintaining the appearance of a middle-class salary while secretly funding an upgraded lifestyle with money stolen from his mother. I pulled out my laptop and began researching the companies and account numbers listed on the statement. What I discovered was even more disturbing than I had initially imagined. Morales Investment Holdings was registered as a family trust, with Diego listed as the trustee and me listed as the beneficiary, but my signature on the documents had been forged. The registration address was a mailbox service rather than a legitimate business location, and the stated purpose of the trust was, quote, estate planning and asset protection for Elena Morales. The sophistication of the fraud suggested Diego had received professional help in setting up these structures. Creating fake trusts and forging signatures required knowledge of legal procedures and access to official-looking documents that would pass casual inspection. This wasn't the work of someone who had impulsively decided to steal from his mother. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign of financial fraud that had been planned and executed with precision. As I dug deeper into the online records, I discovered that Diego had been even busier than the single bank statement suggested. There were multiple accounts, investment funds, and business entities created in my name or in the name of various family trusts that I had never authorized. The total amount of money that had been diverted from my legitimate accounts appeared to be well over $500,000, representing not just current theft, but the theft of compound interest and investment growth that money should have generated over the past 18 months. The emotional impact of these discoveries was almost overwhelming. This wasn't just financial crime. It was a fundamental betrayal of the parent-child relationship that I had cherished throughout Diego's life. I had worked 16-hour days for decades to build the bakery business, often sacrificing personal time and relationships to ensure my children would have opportunities I had never enjoyed. I had paid for Diego's education, helped him with down payments on cars and houses, and provided countless forms of support that parents offer their children out of love and hope for their success. In return, Diego had repaid my generosity by stealing from me in the most calculated and sophisticated way possible. He had used his knowledge of my business practices, his access to my home and personal information, and my trust in him as my son to construct an elaborate fraud scheme that could have eventually left me financially devastated. The betrayal felt personal in a way that simple theft from a stranger never could, because it involved the deliberate exploitation of family bonds and parental love. But alongside the hurt and anger, I felt something else: determination. Diego had underestimated me, just as many people had underestimated me throughout my life. They saw an aging immigrant woman and assumed I would be easy to manipulate or too embarrassed to fight back against family members. They didn't understand that building a successful business from nothing required not just hard work but strategic thinking, careful planning, and the ability to make difficult decisions when necessary. Diego was about to learn that the mother who had sacrificed everything for his success was also capable of defending herself when that sacrifice was repaid with betrayal. I spent the next several hours documenting everything I had discovered, creating a comprehensive file of evidence that would be needed for whatever legal action might become necessary. I photographed the bank statement Marcus had found, printed out the online records I had discovered, and began creating a timeline of suspicious events and conversations that now made sense in the context of Diego's fraud scheme. The process was emotionally draining but also empowering, as each piece of evidence reinforced my growing understanding of what had been done to me and what needed to be done in response. By midnight, I had a clear picture of the situation and a preliminary plan for addressing it. The fraud was extensive and sophisticated, involving multiple financial institutions and legal entities that would require professional help to unravel. Confronting Diego directly without proper preparation could lead to the destruction of evidence or the acceleration of his theft efforts. What I needed was legal counsel, forensic accounting expertise, and a strategy that would protect both my assets and my grandchildren from the consequences of their father's crimes. The most heartbreaking aspect of the situation was the impact it would inevitably have on Marcus and Sofia. They would lose not just their father's financial support when his crimes were exposed, but also their sense of security and trust in the adults who were supposed to protect them. Marcus had already been traumatized by his discovery of his father's deception, and Sofia would soon learn that the comfortable life she had always known was built on money stolen from her grandmother. The children were innocent victims of Diego's greed, and any response to his crimes would need to prioritize their welfare above all other considerations. As I finally prepared for bed that night, I thought about the conversation I would need to have with Marcus the next day. He deserved to know that his courage in showing me the bank statement had been the key to uncovering his father's crimes. But he also needed reassurance that he wasn't responsible for whatever consequences would follow. Children should never be placed in the position of having to choose between protecting a parent and protecting a grandparent, and I was determined to handle the situation in a way that preserved Marcus's relationship with his father, while still ensuring that justice was served. The irony wasn't lost on me that my 10-year-old grandson had demonstrated more integrity and moral courage than his father, who was 34 years old, and had supposedly learned about ethics and responsibility through his college education and professional experience. Marcus had recognized wrongdoing and taken action to protect his grandmother, while Diego had systematically exploited his mother's trust and love for his own financial gain. The contrast suggested that character was something deeper than education or social position, and that sometimes the smallest voices carried the most important truths. I fell asleep that night with the bank statement still on my kitchen table, a piece of paper that represented both the depth of my son's betrayal and the beginning of my fight to reclaim what had been stolen. Tomorrow would bring the start of a process that would test every relationship in my family and force me to make decisions that would reshape our lives forever. But I had faced difficult challenges before, and I had the advantage of knowing the truth while Diego still believed his deception was secure. The next morning brought the kind of crisp October air that usually energized me for a full day of work at the bakery. Instead, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with coffee growing cold, staring at documents that proved my son was a thief. The night's sleep had not diminished the shock or anger, but it had clarified my resolve. Diego's theft was not just a crime against me. It was a crime against the family legacy I had built and the security I had planned to provide for my grandchildren's future. My first call was to Maria Sandoval, the attorney who had helped me navigate various business and legal issues over the past 15 years. Maria had built her practice on serving the Latino business community in Riverside County, and she had earned a reputation for fierce advocacy combined with practical wisdom. More importantly, she understood the cultural complexities records I had discovered, and began creating a timeline of suspicious events and conversations that now made sense in the context of Diego's fraud scheme. The process was emotionally draining but also empowering, as each piece of evidence reinforced my growing understanding of what had been done to me and what needed to be done in response. By midnight, I had a clear picture of the situation and a preliminary plan for addressing it. The fraud was extensive and sophisticated, involving multiple financial institutions and legal entities that would require professional help to unravel. Confronting Diego directly without proper preparation could lead to the destruction of evidence or the acceleration of his theft efforts. What I needed was legal counsel, forensic accounting expertise, and a strategy that would protect both my assets and my grandchildren from the consequences of their father's crimes. The most heartbreaking aspect of the situation was the impact it would inevitably have on Marcus and Sofia. They would lose not just their father's financial support when his crimes were exposed, but also their sense of security and trust in the adults who were supposed to protect them. Marcus had already been traumatized by his discovery of his father's deception, and Sofia would soon learn that the comfortable life she had always known was built on money stolen from her grandmother. The children were innocent victims of Diego's greed, and any response to his crimes would need to prioritize their welfare above all other considerations. As I finally prepared for bed that night, I thought about the conversation I would need to have with Marcus the next day. He deserved to know that his courage in showing me the bank statement had been the key to uncovering his father's crimes. But he also needed reassurance that he wasn't responsible for whatever consequences would follow. Children should never be placed in the position of having to choose between protecting a parent and protecting a grandparent, and I was determined to handle the situation in a way that preserved Marcus's relationship with his father, while still ensuring that justice was served. The irony wasn't lost on me that my 10-year-old grandson had demonstrated more integrity and moral courage than his father, who was 34 years old, and had supposedly learned about ethics and responsibility through his college education and professional experience. Marcus had recognized wrongdoing and taken action to protect his grandmother, while Diego had systematically exploited his mother's trust and love for his own financial gain. The contrast suggested that character was something deeper than education or social position, and that sometimes the smallest voices carried the most important truths. I fell asleep that night with the bank statement still on my kitchen table, a piece of paper that represented both the depth of my son's betrayal and the beginning of my fight to reclaim what had been stolen. Tomorrow would bring the start of a process that would test every relationship in my family and force me to make decisions that would reshape our lives forever. But I had faced difficult challenges before, and I had the advantage of knowing the truth while Diego still believed his deception was secure. The next morning brought the kind of crisp October air that usually energized me for a full day of work at the bakery. Instead, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with coffee growing cold, staring at documents that proved my son was a thief. The night's sleep had not diminished the shock or anger, but it had clarified my resolve. Diego's theft was not just a crime against me. It was a crime against the family legacy I had built and the security I had planned to provide for my grandchildren's future. My first call was to Maria Sandoval, the attorney who had helped me navigate various business and legal issues over the past 15 years. Maria had built her practice on serving the Latino business community in Riverside County, and she had earned a reputation for fierce advocacy combined with practical wisdom. More importantly, she understood the cultural complexities than I had anticipated. Diego's access to my personal information meant that simply changing passwords or account numbers might not be sufficient to prevent continued theft. Carmen recommended working with my banks to establish new security protocols that would flag any attempts to access my accounts or create new financial instruments in my name. She also suggested implementing legal safeguards that would require multiple forms of verification for any significant financial transactions. While the financial professionals worked to quantify and contain Diego's theft, I struggled with the emotional and family implications of what I had discovered. In the weeks since Marcus had shown me the bank statement, I had maintained normal interactions with Diego and Carmen, attending Sofia's school play and sharing a family dinner where Diego had seemed relaxed and affectionate. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable, watching my son hug his children while knowing he was systematically stealing from their grandmother, listening to him make jokes and share family stories while calculating how much money he had stolen that very day. The hardest part was interacting with Marcus, who would catch my eye during family gatherings with expressions that showed he understood the weight of what he had revealed. At 10 years old, he was carrying a burden that no child should bear, caught between loyalty to his father and knowledge that his father was doing something wrong. I tried to reassure him with smiles and extra attention, but I could see the stress taking its toll on his usually cheerful demeanor. Carmen Rodriguez completed her initial forensic analysis after 10 days of intensive work, and the results were even worse than I had feared. Diego had been stealing from me for over 2 years, starting with small withdrawals that gradually escalated to major diversions of business income and personal savings. The total theft exceeded $800,000, making this one of the largest cases of family financial fraud she had encountered in her professional career. The sophistication of this operation suggests your son had professional help, Carmen reported during a meeting at Maria's law office. The legal documents were prepared by someone with knowledge of trust and estate law. The shell companies were registered using techniques designed to avoid scrutiny from banking regulators. The systematic interception of your deposits required coordination with multiple financial institutions. This wasn't just your son acting alone. This was a conspiracy involving several people with specialized knowledge. The revelation that Diego had accomplices added another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation. Who else knew about the theft? Who had helped him forge documents and create fake financial entities? How many other families might be victims of similar schemes if this was part of a broader criminal operation? The questions multiplied faster than the answers, and each new discovery made me feel more vulnerable and isolated. Maria recommended hiring a private investigator to identify Diego's accomplices and understand the full scope of the criminal network. The investigator, Roberto Chen, was a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime and had experience with cases involving family financial abuse. Roberto explained that sophisticated fraud schemes often involve networks of professionals who provided specialized services to multiple criminals, making it important to understand the broader context of Diego's activities. Your son didn't develop this level of expertise overnight, Roberto observed after reviewing the forensic accountant's findings. The techniques he used are commonly employed by professional con artists and financial predators. Someone taught him these methods, provided him with templates for forged documents, and probably coached him on how to avoid detection. Finding those people is important not just for your case, but for preventing them from victimizing other families. As the investigation expanded, I found myself living a double life that was emotionally exhausting and psychologically disturbing. During the day, I continued operating my bakery business, managing employees, and serving customers who had no idea their beloved owner was dealing with family betrayal and financial crime. In the evenings, I met with attorneys, investigators, and forensic accountants who were helping me understand the full scope of what had been done to me and develop strategies for recovery and prevention. The most difficult aspect was maintaining normal family relationships while the investigation proceeded. Diego continued to visit regularly, bringing the grandchildren for dinner and weekend activities that had been family traditions for years. Sophia would run to hug me with the innocent affection of a 7-year-old who believed her world was secure and loving. Marcus would watch his father carefully, his young face showing the strain of carrying adult knowledge while pretending everything was normal. During one particularly difficult Sunday dinner, Diego brought up the financial advisor again, suggesting that my continued delay in making investment decisions was costing me opportunities for growth and tax savings. The irony of receiving financial advice from someone who was actively stealing from me was almost surreal, but I maintained my composure and gave the same response I had been offering for weeks. I was still reviewing options with my attorney and would make decisions when I was ready. "Mama, I'm just worried that you're being too conservative in your approach," Diego said while helping me clear dishes from the table. "The economy is changing rapidly, and traditional investment strategies might not provide the security you're counting on for retirement. The advisor I recommended has helped lots of families optimize their wealth management during uncertain times." The manipulation was so blatant that I almost laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. Diego was essentially arguing that I needed to give him greater access to my money because traditional security measures weren't reliable, all while he was proving that the greatest threat to my financial security was my own son. The psychological techniques he was employing, creating fear about my current situation, positioning himself as the solution, and applying gentle pressure disguised as family concern were textbook examples of financial predator behavior. "I appreciate your concern, Miko," I replied, using the endearment that still came naturally despite everything I knew about his criminal activities. "But I've been managing my finances successfully for 30 years, and I'm not ready to make major changes without very careful consideration. When I'm ready to explore new options, I'll let you know." Diego's expression showed a flash of frustration that he quickly suppressed, but not before Marcus noticed the change in his father's demeanor. The 10-year-old's eyes darted between his father and me, and I could see him processing the tension that was becoming harder to hide. Children were often more perceptive than adults realized, and Marcus was clearly picking up on undercurrents that suggested all was not well in our family despite the surface appearance of normalcy. After 3 weeks of investigation, Roberto Chen requested a meeting to share his preliminary findings about Diego's accomplices and the broader scope of the criminal operation. What he had discovered was shocking, even by the standards of what I had already learned about my son's activities. Diego was part of a sophisticated fraud network that targeted elderly parents of successful adult children, using family relationships to gain access to substantial assets that could be stolen over extended periods without detection. "Your son was recruited by a financial advisor named Kenneth Walsh, who runs what appears to be a legitimate investment firm, but actually specializes in elder financial abuse," Roberto explained. "Walsh provides training, document templates, and ongoing support for adult children who want to steal from their parents. He takes a percentage of the stolen money in exchange for his services, and he's been operating this scheme for at least 5 years, with dozens of families as victims." The revelation that Diego's crimes were part of a larger criminal enterprise was both horrifying and oddly comforting. Horrifying because it meant many other families were suffering similar betrayals, but comforting because it meant Diego's actions weren't entirely a reflection of personal moral failure, but partly the result of being manipulated by sophisticated criminals. It didn't excuse his choices, but it provided context that helped me understand how a son I had raised with strong values could have become capable of such elaborate deception. Roberto had identified at least 3 other members of the fraud network beyond Kenneth Walsh. There was an attorney named David Kim who specialized in creating fraudulent trust documents and forged signatures. There was an accountant named Susan Peters who helped launder stolen money through fake investment accounts and shell companies. And there was a banker named Michael Torres, who facilitated the creation of unauthorized accounts and helped intercept deposits intended for legitimate accounts. "This is a professional criminal organization with sophisticated methods and extensive experience," Roberto warned. "They've been very successful at avoiding detection because they target victims who are reluctant to report family members to law enforcement. Most elderly parents would rather absorb financial losses than see their children go to prison, and the criminals exploit that reluctance to continue their operations for years." The scope of the criminal network explained how Diego had been able to steal such large amounts of money over an extended period without being detected. He wasn't just a son who had decided to steal from his mother. He was part of a criminal conspiracy that had developed refined techniques for family financial abuse. The knowledge and resources provided by his accomplices had enabled him to construct a fraud scheme that might have continued indefinitely if Marcus hadn't accidentally discovered that single bank statement. Maria Sandoval convened a strategy meeting to discuss our options for recovery and prosecution now that we understood the full scope of the criminal operation. The evidence was overwhelming, with clear documentation of fraud, forgery, money laundering, and conspiracy. Criminal charges could potentially result in significant prison sentences for all the participants, and civil litigation could recover substantial damages from both the individual criminals and their business entities. "The district attorney's office has been looking for a case like this," Maria explained. "Elder financial abuse is a growing problem, and they want to send a message that these crimes will be prosecuted aggressively. Your case has everything they need: clear evidence, substantial damages, multiple defendants, and a criminal organization that represents an ongoing threat to the community. However, pursuing criminal charges would inevitably result in Diego's imprisonment, the destruction of his career, and severe financial hardship for Carmen and the grandchildren. Sophia and Marcus would lose their father, their comfortable lifestyle, and their sense of security about their family's moral foundation. The collateral damage to innocent family members was a serious consideration that complicated any decision about how to proceed. "What are the alternatives to criminal prosecution?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand that some form of legal action was inevitable given the scope of the theft and the ongoing nature of the crimes. Maria explained that civil litigation could potentially recover the stolen money without involving criminal charges, but it would still be a public process that would expose the family situation and likely result in the same financial consequences for Diego's family. "There's also the question of preventing future crimes," Roberto added. "If we don't pursue criminal charges, Kenneth Walsh and his network will continue targeting other families. Your son's case could be the key to shutting down an operation that has victimized dozens of elderly parents and stolen millions of dollars from retirees who trusted their children." The moral implications were clear but emotionally devastating. Protecting my grandchildren from the consequences of their father's crimes would mean allowing other grandchildren to become victims of the same criminal network. Recovering my stolen money might require destroying the financial security of Marcus and Sophia. Every option involved choosing between competing values and relationships that were all important to me. As I drove home from that strategy meeting, I thought about the 10-year-old boy who had changed everything by showing me a piece of paper he had found in his father's office. Marcus had demonstrated more integrity and courage than many adults ever managed, and he deserved to be protected from the consequences of his father's choices. But he also deserved to grow up in a world where crime had consequences, and where people who betrayed family trust were held accountable for their actions. The decision would have to be made soon. Diego was continuing to steal money every day, the criminal network was presumably targeting other families, and the longer we waited, the more difficult recovery would become. Justice delayed was not just justice denied, it was ongoing victimization that was affecting multiple families and would continue until someone had the courage to stop it. That night, I sat in my kitchen with all the evidence spread across the table, looking at bank statements, forged documents, and investigative reports that told the story of my son's betrayal in devastating detail. The financial theft was quantifiable and recoverable through legal action. The emotional theft of trust, family bonds, and grandfather-grandchildren relationships was permanent and irreversible. Diego had stolen not just money, but the sense of security and family unity that had been the foundation of my happiness for decades. But as I looked at the evidence, I also saw something else. The courage of a 10-year-old boy who had chosen truth over family loyalty, and the strength of professional relationships that had helped me understand and address a complex criminal conspiracy. The bakery employees who asked about my well-being, the attorney who worked evenings and weekends on my case, the investigator who treated my family situation with dignity and respect. These relationships reminded me that family wasn't just about blood relations, but about people who demonstrated genuine care and trustworthiness. Marcus had shown me that even in the darkest family situations, there could be light from unexpected sources. He had also shown me that protecting the innocent sometimes required confronting the guilty, regardless of family relationships or emotional consequences. Tomorrow would bring decisions that would reshape my family forever, but tonight I could honor the courage of my grandson by matching his integrity with my own. The morning light streaming through my kitchen window felt different somehow, as if the world had shifted overnight and would never look quite the same again. I had made my decision during the sleepless hours before dawn, weighing the courage of a 10-year-old boy against the consequences of inaction, measuring family loyalty against justice for countless other victims. Diego's crimes would not continue, and Kenneth Walsh's network of elder abuse would face the full force of the law, regardless of what it meant for my family's future. My first call was to Maria Sandoval, who arrived at my house within an hour carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and a grim determination that matched my own. "Elena, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I believe we need to move quickly on multiple fronts," she said as we settled at my kitchen table surrounded by evidence of Diego's betrayal. "The district attorney's office is very interested in this case, and they're prepared to offer protection for you and your grandchildren if you're willing to cooperate with their investigation." The protection offer was both reassuring and terrifying, confirming that the threat from Kenneth Walsh's criminal network was serious enough to warrant law enforcement concern. Maria explained that organized fraud operations often attempted to intimidate victims who threatened to expose their activities, using tactics ranging from financial manipulation to physical threats. The district attorney wanted to ensure my safety while building a case that could dismantle the entire criminal organization. What does cooperation involve? I asked, though I had already committed myself to whatever path would lead to justice and protection for other potential victims. Maria outlined a process that would require detailed testimony about Diego's activities, participation in controlled communications designed to gather additional evidence, and potentially testifying at trial against my own son and his accomplices. The emotional toll would be devastating, but the alternative was allowing the victimization to continue indefinitely. Roberto Chen joined us an hour later with updates from his ongoing investigation that painted an even more disturbing picture of the criminal network's activities. We've identified at least 12 other families that have been targeted by Kenneth Walsh's operation over the past 3 years, he reported, spreading photographs and documents across my table. The stolen amounts range from $200,000 to over $1 million per family, and in most cases, the victims never reported the crimes because they involved their own children. The photographs showed elderly men and women whose faces reflected the same pain and betrayal I had been experiencing since Marcus first showed me that bank statement. Some were recent immigrants like myself, targeted because language barriers and cultural unfamiliarity with American legal systems made them vulnerable to sophisticated fraud schemes. Others were longtime American citizens whose trust in their children had been exploited by criminals who understood that family loyalty could be weaponized against parental victims. The pattern is always the same, Roberto continued. Walsh identifies successful elderly parents through social media, business records, and referrals from previous victims. He recruits their adult children through legitimate-seeming investment seminars and financial planning workshops. Once the children are hooked by promises of easy money, Walsh provides them with training, documentation, and ongoing support for stealing from their parents. The systematic nature of the operation was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. This wasn't opportunistic crime, but methodical exploitation of the most fundamental human relationships. Kenneth Walsh had built a business model around destroying families, turning children into thieves and parents into victims, all while maintaining the appearance of a legitimate financial services operation. Maria's phone buzzed with a call from Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Park, who specialized in elder abuse cases and had been briefed on our situation. After a brief conversation, Maria hung up and turned to me with an expression that mixed hope with concern. Jennifer wants to meet with you this afternoon. She's prepared to offer immunity from any potential charges related to unreported income or tax implications of the stolen money, but she needs your commitment to full cooperation with their investigation. The immunity offer addressed concerns I hadn't even considered about potential legal consequences for being the victim of elaborate financial fraud. Apparently, stolen money that had been reported as legitimate income could create tax complications, and fraudulent accounts created in my name might have generated legal obligations I was unaware of. The district attorney's office wanted to remove any barriers that might prevent my cooperation with their efforts to prosecute the criminal network. What about my grandchildren? I asked, voicing the concern that had kept me awake most of the night. Marcus and Sophia are innocent victims in this situation, and whatever happens to Diego will devastate their lives. Is there any way to minimize the impact on them? Maria explained that family services would be involved to ensure the children's welfare, and that Carmen would likely qualify for victim assistance programs, since she appeared to be unaware of her husband's criminal activities. The children will need counseling and support, but they'll also need to understand that their father's choices created this situation, Maria said gently. Children are remarkably resilient, and they often recover better from difficult truths than from living with family secrets and lies. Marcus has already shown incredible strength in choosing to protect you rather than cover for his father. By afternoon, I found myself in the district attorney's office downtown, sitting across from Jennifer Park in a conference room that overlooked the courthouse where Diego would eventually face trial for his crimes. Jennifer was younger than I had expected, probably in her late 30s, but her manner conveyed both competence and compassion that helped ease my anxiety about the legal process ahead. Mrs. Morales, I want you to understand that pursuing this case will be difficult for your family, but it's also an opportunity to prevent dozens of other families from experiencing what you've been through. Jennifer began. Kenneth Walsh's operation has been on our radar for months, but we've never had a victim willing to testify and evidence strong enough to prosecute the entire network. Your case could be the key to shutting them down permanently. Jennifer explained that the investigation would involve multiple law enforcement agencies, including the FBI's white-collar crime unit and the state attorney general's office. The scope of the criminal network extended beyond California, with victims identified in Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon. Diego's case was part of a much larger pattern of organized elder abuse that had been operating under the radar for years. We'll need you to participate in controlled phone calls with your son, designed to gather admissions about his activities and information about his accomplices, Jennifer continued. We'll also need detailed testimony about the timeline of events, the financial impact of the theft, and any conversations that might provide insight into the network's operations. It won't be easy, but it's the best way to ensure justice for all the victims. The controlled phone calls would be the most emotionally challenging aspect of my cooperation. Speaking with Diego while knowing our conversation was being recorded, trying to elicit admissions of guilt from my own son, pretending normalcy while gathering evidence that would send him to prison. The psychological demands seemed almost unbearable. But when I thought about Marcus's courage in showing me that bank statement, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. When do we start? I asked, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. Jennifer smiled with what looked like genuine respect. We can begin tomorrow if you're ready. The sooner we act, the less opportunity the network has to destroy evidence or target additional victims. That evening, I called Marcus and asked if he could spend the night at my house, ostensibly for a grandmother-grandson bonding evening, but actually because I needed his presence as I prepared for what would be the most difficult conversation of my life. When he arrived with his overnight bag and homework assignments, his young face showed the same concern that had prompted him to share his discovery in the first place. Grandma Elena, is everything okay with the money situation? He asked as we sat together on my couch after dinner. His directness reminded me why I trusted him more than many adults in my life. You've seemed worried ever since I showed you that paper. And Daddy's been acting strange too. He keeps asking if I've talked to you about anything important. The revelation that Diego was monitoring Marcus for signs that his crimes had been discovered added another layer of manipulation to an already devastating situation. My son was essentially using his own child as an early warning system for potential exposure, putting Marcus in the impossible position of either lying to his father or betraying his grandmother's confidence. Marcus, you need to know that what you did was very brave and very important, I said, choosing my words carefully. The paper you showed me helped me discover that Daddy has been taking money that doesn't belong to him. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk to Daddy about it, and things might get difficult for our family. But whatever happens, I want you to know that you did the right thing, and I'm very proud of you. Marcus's eyes filled with tears as he processed the implications of what I was telling him. At 10 years old, he was mature enough to understand that his actions had set in motion events that would change his family forever, but young enough to feel guilty about the consequences his father would face. Will Daddy go to jail? He asked in a voice that was barely a whisper. I don't know what will happen to Daddy, I answered honestly, but I know that when people take money that doesn't belong to them, there are consequences. And I know that protecting people from being hurt is more important than protecting people from facing consequences for hurting others. Marcus nodded solemnly, and I could see him struggling with concepts that challenged most adults: understanding of justice and family loyalty. The next morning, I sat in my kitchen with FBI agents testing recording equipment while Jennifer Park reviewed the conversation strategy we had developed. The goal was to get Diego to admit his theft, identify his accomplices, and provide details about the scope of his criminal activities. The approach would be gradual, starting with expressions of concern about financial irregularities and escalating to direct accusations only if necessary. Remember, Mrs. Morales, your son is likely to deny everything initially and may try to manipulate you emotionally, Agent Sarah Martinez warned as she adjusted the recording device. Criminal organizations like this train their participants in how to respond to exposure attempts. He may claim you're confused, suggest you're having memory problems, or try to make you feel guilty for doubting him. Don't let emotional manipulation derail the conversation. The phone felt impossibly heavy as I dialed Diego's number, knowing that this conversation would end our relationship as mother and son forever, regardless of how the legal proceedings concluded. When he answered with his usual cheerful greeting, the normalcy of his voice in contrast to the extraordinary circumstances felt surreal. "Mijo, I need to talk to you about some financial irregularities I've discovered in my accounts." I began, following the script we had developed while trying to maintain my natural speaking patterns. "There are some deposits and withdrawals that I don't understand, and I'm hoping you can help me figure out what's happening." Diego's pause was almost imperceptible, but I caught it because I was listening so carefully. "What kind of irregularities, Mama? Maybe there's just some confusion about your banking procedures or investment transactions. You know how complicated financial institutions can make things sometimes." The immediate deflection to suggest I was confused rather than victimized was exactly what Agent Martinez had predicted. Diego was following a script too, one designed to gaslight victims and make them doubt their own perceptions. "I found an account that has my name on it but that I never opened," I continued. "It shows deposits that correspond to times when I made cash deposits at my regular bank, but the money never appeared in my legitimate accounts." This time Diego's pause was longer, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a tension that hadn't been there before. "That sounds like identity theft or some kind of banking error, Mama. Have you contacted your bank's fraud department? They should be able to trace what happened and fix any mistakes." The suggestion that I contact the fraud department was particularly ironic coming from someone who was committing fraud against me. But it also revealed that Diego was still trying to maintain his innocence rather than confessing to activities I already had documented evidence of. "The bank told me the account was opened with proper identification and signatures that match my records," I said, moving closer to direct accusation. "They also told me that you're listed as an authorized user on the account." The silence that followed stretched long enough that I wondered if Diego had hung up the phone. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed completely, dropping the pretense of confusion and taking on a cold, calculating tone that I had never heard from my son before. "Mama, I think you're getting some bad information from people who don't understand your financial situation. Maybe we should meet in person to discuss this so I can help you sort out any confusion." The suggestion of an in-person meeting triggered alarm bells that Agent Martinez had specifically warned me about. Criminal organizations often used face-to-face encounters to intimidate victims, destroy evidence, or coordinate stories among accomplices. Diego's request suggested he was either panicking or following protocols designed to contain exposure of the criminal network. "I'm not confused, Diego," I said, abandoning the gradual approach in favor of direct confrontation. "I know you've been stealing my money. I know about the fake trust accounts, the forged signatures, and the shell companies you've created using my identity. What I want to know is why you thought it was acceptable to rob your own mother, and how many other people are involved in this scheme." The transformation in Diego's voice was immediate and chilling. Gone was any pretense of concern or confusion, replaced by anger and what sounded like genuine surprise that his activities had been discovered. "Who told you about this? What exactly do you think you know? Because if you're listening to the wrong people, you could cause serious problems for this entire family." The implicit threat in his words was unmistakable, and I could see Agent Martinez taking notes about Diego's response. He wasn't denying the theft, he was angry about the exposure, and worried about the consequences for himself and his accomplices. "Marcus found one of your bank statements," I said, deciding that Diego needed to understand the source of his exposure. "My 10-year-old grandson showed more integrity in one moment than you've shown in 2 years of stealing from me." Diego's reaction was explosive and revealed the depth of his desperation. "That little brat has no business going through my private papers. Do you have any idea what you've started here? This isn't just about me, Mama. There are other people involved who aren't going to be happy about family members causing problems for legitimate business operations." The mention of other people and legitimate business operations was exactly the kind of evidence the FBI needed to build their case against Kenneth Walsh's criminal network. Diego was essentially confessing to conspiracy and threatening me with retaliation from his accomplices, all while being recorded by federal agents. "Who are these other people, Diego?" I asked, following Agent Martinez's signals to pursue this line of questioning. "What legitimate business operations involve stealing money from elderly parents and forging their signatures on legal documents?" Diego seemed to realize he had said too much, because his next response was more controlled, though no less threatening. "Mama, you don't understand the situation you're creating. The best thing for everyone would be to drop this investigation and let me handle any financial irregularities through proper channels. If you keep pushing this, you're going to hurt a lot of innocent people, including your own grandchildren." The threat against Marcus and Sofia was the final straw that destroyed any remaining maternal instinct to protect Diego from the consequences of his actions. "The only person who has hurt my grandchildren is their father, who chose to become a criminal instead of a role model," I replied, my voice carrying an anger that surprised even me. "You've destroyed their sense of security, their trust in family, and their financial future, all for money that you could have earned honestly if you had any work ethic or integrity." "This conversation is over," Diego said, and the line went dead. Agent Martinez immediately began reviewing the recording, while Jennifer Park made notes about admissions and threats that could be used in criminal prosecution. The call had been more successful than anyone had hoped, providing clear evidence of Diego's guilt, his connection to a larger criminal organization, and his willingness to threaten family members who exposed his activities. "Mrs. Morales, that was incredibly difficult, and you handled it perfectly," Jennifer said after reviewing the recording. "We have admissions of criminal activity, references to accomplices, and threats against witnesses. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need to prosecute not just your son but the entire network he's working with." But even as the legal professionals celebrated the success of the controlled call, I felt emotionally devastated by the finality of what had just occurred. The son I had raised, educated, and supported had threatened his own mother for exposing his crimes. He had shown no remorse for his theft, no concern for the impact on his children, and no recognition that his actions were morally wrong. The Diego I had spoken with was a stranger who happened to share DNA with the child I had loved and sacrificed for throughout his life. The investigation moved rapidly after the recorded phone call provided evidence of Diego's criminal activities and connections to Kenneth Walsh's organization. Within a week, federal agents had executed search warrants on Diego's home, Kenneth Walsh's offices, and the business locations of several identified accomplices. The scope of evidence recovered was staggering, including client lists with hundreds of potential victims, training materials for financial fraud schemes, and financial records showing millions of dollars in stolen assets. Diego was arrested at his workplace on a Thursday morning, taken into custody on charges of wire fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The local news media covered the arrest as part of a larger story about the federal investigation into organized elder abuse, and by evening, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters, concerned friends, and other potential victims who had recognized similarities to their own family situations. Carmen called me that afternoon, sobbing and barely coherent as she tried to understand how her husband had hidden such extensive criminal activities from his own family. "Elena, I swear I didn't know anything about what Diego was doing," she said through tears that I could hear over the phone. "The money for our vacations, the new car, the kids, private school tuition, I thought it all came from his job and the bonuses he said he was earning. I never questioned it because he handled all our finances." Carmen's innocence was confirmed by the FBI investigation, which found no evidence that she had knowledge of or participation in Diego's criminal activities. She was as much a victim as I was, having been deceived by a husband who had built their comfortable lifestyle on money stolen from his mother. The revelation destroyed not only her marriage, but her sense of reality about the man she had trusted with her life and her children's future. "What's going to happen to Marcus and Sofia?" Carmen asked, voicing the concern that had been keeping me awake since Diego's arrest. "How do I explain to them that their father is a criminal? How do I tell them that everything we've given them was paid for with money stolen from their grandmother?" The questions had no easy answers, but I knew that honest conversation was better than family secrets that would eventually surface anyway. Children were remarkably resilient when treated with age-appropriate honesty, And both Marcus and Sophia deserve to understand the truth about their family situation, rather than being protected through lies that would ultimately prove more harmful than reality. We tell them the truth in ways they can understand, I said, speaking as much to myself as to Carmen. We tell them that their father made very bad choices, but that his choices don't define them. We tell them that families can heal from even terrible situations if people are willing to take responsibility and work toward making things right. The media attention surrounding Diego's arrest and the broader federal investigation brought unexpected consequences that complicated an already difficult situation. Other victims of Kenneth Walsh's network began contacting me directly, sharing their own stories of family betrayal and financial theft. Some had never reported their victimization because they couldn't bear the thought of seeing their children prosecuted. Others had been intimidated into silence by threats similar to those Diego had made during our recorded phone call. Maria Elena Gutierrez was a 72-year-old retired teacher whose daughter had stolen over $600,000 from her retirement savings using techniques identical to Diego's methods. I knew something was wrong when my bank statements stopped making sense, but Patricia kept telling me I was getting confused because of my age. She told me during a phone conversation that lasted over an hour. When I saw the news about your case, I realized I wasn't crazy and I wasn't alone. Similar conversations filled my days as the investigation progressed and more victims found the courage to come forward. The scope of Kenneth Walsh's criminal network was far larger than anyone had initially suspected, with victims spanning multiple states and stolen assets totaling over $15 million. The criminal organization had been operating for nearly a decade, perfecting techniques for family-based financial fraud while maintaining the appearance of legitimate business operations. The preliminary hearing for Diego's case was scheduled for a month after his arrest, giving the prosecution time to organize evidence, while providing me with an opportunity to prepare emotionally for the process of testifying against my own son. Jennifer Park arranged for victim advocacy services to help me navigate the psychological challenges of the legal proceedings, and I began meeting weekly with a counselor who specialized in family financial abuse cases. The trauma of financial theft by family members is often more severe than other forms of financial crime because it involves the destruction of fundamental trust relationships, explained Dr. Patricia Reyes during one of our sessions. You're not just dealing with the loss of money. You're grieving the loss of your relationship with your son and processing the betrayal of your most basic assumptions about family loyalty and love. Dr. Reyes helped me understand that my conflicted feelings about Diego's prosecution were normal and healthy rather than signs of weakness or confusion. It was possible to love someone while holding them accountable for their actions, to grieve the loss of a relationship while celebrating the achievement of justice. The emotional complexity of the situation didn't mean I was making wrong choices. It meant I was making difficult but necessary choices that honored both my love for my family and my commitment to preventing future victimization. Marcus and Sophia began attending counseling sessions designed specifically for children whose parents were involved in criminal proceedings. The family services counselor, Janet Morrison, explained that children often blamed themselves for family crises and needed professional help to understand that their father's choices were not their fault and not their responsibility to fix. Marcus has been carrying a tremendous burden since he discovered his father's activities. Janet told me after her first session with my grandson. He feels responsible for the family's situation because he showed you the bank statement, but he also feels proud that he protected you from continued theft. We're working on helping him understand that he made a brave and correct choice, even though that choice had difficult consequences. Sophia's response to her father's arrest was different from Marcus's mixture of guilt and pride. At 7 years old, she simply missed her daddy and couldn't understand why he couldn't come home. Her questions about when the family would be together again broke my heart, especially because I knew that even if Diego avoided prison time, the family dynamics had been permanently altered by his criminal activities. Will Daddy be able to come to my birthday party next month? Sophia asked during one of her visits to my house, her young face reflecting confusion about adult concepts like criminal prosecution and incarceration. Marcus says Daddy did something bad with money, but I don't understand why that means he can't come home. Carmen and I worked together to provide age-appropriate explanations that honored Sophia's need for security, while preparing her for the reality that her father's presence in her life would be limited for the foreseeable future. It was a delicate balance between honesty and protection, truth-telling and hope, accountability and love. The federal prosecution of Kenneth Walsh and his criminal network proceeded rapidly as evidence mounted and additional victims came forward to testify. Roberto Chen's investigation had identified accomplices in multiple states, and coordinated arrests were conducted simultaneously to prevent evidence destruction and flight by the defendants. The scope of the operation was unprecedented in federal elder abuse prosecutions, with over 40 defendants facing charges ranging from fraud to racketeering. Diego's attorney, a public defender named Michael Santos, approached Maria about the possibility of a plea agreement that would involve cooperation with the federal investigation in exchange for reduced charges. The offer was tempting from a family perspective because it would minimize Diego's prison time and potentially preserve some relationship with his children, but it also required him to provide testimony against Kenneth Walsh and other network members. "Your son has information that could be crucial to prosecuting the leaders of this criminal organization," Jennifer Park explained during a meeting to discuss the plea offer. "Kenneth Walsh has been the primary target of this investigation from the beginning, and Diego's testimony about recruitment, training, and operational methods could ensure Walsh receives a sentence that prevents him from victimizing additional families. The irony of hoping that my son would cooperate with law enforcement against his criminal accomplices was not lost on me. 6 months earlier, I had trusted Diego completely and would never have imagined he was capable of theft, deception, and threats against his own family. Now I was hoping he would demonstrate enough integrity to help prosecute other criminals, even though his cooperation would be motivated by self-interest rather than genuine remorse." Diego ultimately accepted the plea agreement, admitting guilt to charges of wire fraud and conspiracy, while agreeing to testify against Kenneth Walsh and provide detailed information about the criminal network's operations. His cooperation was extensive and valuable, revealing recruitment methods, fraud techniques, and organizational structures that helped federal prosecutors build comprehensive cases against the network's leadership. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 months after Diego's guilty plea, allowing time for his cooperation to be evaluated and for victim impact statements to be prepared. I spent weeks writing and rewriting my statement, trying to capture the full scope of how Diego's crimes had affected not just my finances but my family relationships, my sense of security, and my faith in fundamental human values. Your Honor, the financial theft my son committed against me was devastating, but the emotional and psychological damage has been far worse. I read during the sentencing hearing, with Diego sitting just a few feet away in his defendant's chair. He didn't just steal money. He stole my trust, my peace of mind, and my grandchildren's sense of security about their family. He taught them that people they love can betray them in the most fundamental ways, and he forced a 10-year-old child to choose between protecting his grandmother and protecting his father. Diego's reaction to my victim impact statement was the first sign of genuine emotion I had seen from him throughout the entire legal process. His shoulders shook with what appeared to be sobbing, and when he was given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, his apology seemed to carry authentic remorse rather than strategic manipulation. Your Honor, I know that no apology can undo the damage I've caused to my family and to other victims of this criminal network, Diego said, his voice breaking with emotion. I was recruited by people who convinced me that stealing from my mother was somehow different from other forms of theft, because the money would eventually be inherited by my family anyway. I realize now how twisted that logic was, and how it was designed to make me complicit in crimes that I never would have considered under normal circumstances. The judge sentenced Diego to 4 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation and full restitution of the stolen funds. The sentence was on the lower end of federal guidelines because of his cooperation with the investigation, but it still meant that Marcus and Sophia would spend most of their childhood and adolescence with their father incarcerated. Kenneth Walsh received a sentence of 15 years in federal prison after being convicted on multiple counts of racketeering, fraud, and elder abuse. The other network members received sentences ranging from 2 to 8 years, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with the investigation. The criminal organization that had victimized dozens of families was effectively dismantled, with financial assets seized to provide restitution to victims. The recovery of stolen funds was a complex process that took over a year to complete, involving forensic accounting, asset tracing, and coordination with multiple financial institutions. Ultimately, I recovered approximately 70% of the money Diego had stolen, with the remainder lost to investments, expenses, and assets that could not be traced or recovered. The financial impact was significant but manageable given the success of my bakery business and the careful financial planning I had maintained throughout my adult life. More important than financial recovery was the gradual healing of family relationships and the establishment of new patterns of trust and communication. Marcus and Sophia spent increasing amounts of time at my house, and I became more involved in their daily lives as Carmen adjusted to single parenthood and the financial challenges created by Diego's criminal activities. The children thrived with additional stability and attention, and Marcus in particular seemed to benefit from regular conversations about integrity, responsibility, and moral decision-making. Grandma Elena, do you think Daddy will be a better person when he gets out of prison? Marcus asked during one of our evening talks as I helped him with homework at my kitchen table. The question reflected both his continued love for his father and his mature understanding that Diego's character had serious flaws that needed to be addressed. I hope so, Mijo, I answered honestly. Sometimes people need to face serious consequences before they understand how much damage their choices have caused. Daddy is getting counseling and education while he's in prison, and hopefully that will help him become the kind of father you and Sophia deserve to have. The ongoing relationship with Diego was complicated by the prison environment and the limitations it placed on family communication. I visited him monthly, more for the benefit of maintaining his connection to Marcus and Sophia than from any desire to rebuild our mother-son relationship. The conversations were stilted and often focused on practical matters like legal proceedings, financial restitution, and family updates, rather than the deeper emotional processing that would be necessary for genuine reconciliation. Mama, I know I can never undo what I did to you and to my children, Diego said during one of these visits, speaking through the prison phone system while separated by reinforced glass. I think about it every day, and I understand now that the money was never the real issue. The real issue was that I was willing to betray the person who had sacrificed everything to give me opportunities for success and education. These moments of apparent insight gave me hope that Diego might eventually become capable of authentic remorse and behavioral change, but I remained cautious about trusting his expressions of regret. Criminal behavior patterns were deeply ingrained, and the institutional environment of prison didn't necessarily promote genuine character development as much as it promoted survival and impression management. The media attention surrounding Kenneth Walsh's prosecution and the broader elder abuse investigation led to speaking opportunities that I initially resisted but eventually embraced as ways to prevent other families from experiencing similar victimization. I began giving presentations to community organizations, senior centers, and financial planning groups about recognizing the warning signs of family financial abuse and resources available for victims. The most important thing to understand is that family financial abuse often involves sophisticated criminals who specifically target the trust relationships between parents and children. I would tell audiences who listened with the intense attention of people who recognize their own vulnerabilities. It's not enough to trust your children. You also have to verify their activities and maintain independent oversight of your financial affairs regardless of family pressure to consolidate accounts or simplify management. These speaking engagements were emotionally challenging but also therapeutic, providing opportunities to transform my experience of victimization into education that might protect other families. The questions from audience members often revealed that financial abuse by family members was far more common than most people realized, with many attendees sharing their own experiences of theft, manipulation, and betrayal by trusted relatives. Carmen gradually rebuilt her life with remarkable resilience, returning to full-time work as a dental hygienist and successfully managing the financial challenges created by Diego's imprisonment and restitution obligations. She participated in support groups for families of incarcerated individuals and developed friendships with other women who were navigating similar challenges. Her strength in protecting Marcus and Sophia from the worst consequences of their father's choices earned my deep respect and reinforced my commitment to supporting their family through the difficult years ahead. Elena, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for us. Carmen told me during one of our regular coffee meetings 6 months after Diego's sentencing. You could have been angry with me for not knowing about Diego's activities, or you could have distanced yourself from the mess he created. Instead, you've been a source of stability and support that has made all the difference for the children and for me. The relationship with Carmen had evolved from daughter-in-law to something more like partnership in protecting and raising Marcus and Sophia. We shared responsibilities for their care, coordinated our responses to their emotional needs, and worked together to maintain their connection to their father while helping them understand the consequences of his choices. It was a complex balancing act that required constant communication and flexibility. 2 years after Diego's sentencing, Marcus asked if he could write a letter to his father expressing his feelings about the family situation and his hopes for their future relationship. The letter, which he shared with me before sending, demonstrated remarkable maturity and emotional intelligence for a 12-year-old who had experienced such family trauma. Dad, I want you to know that I still love you even though I'm angry about what you did to Grandma Elena and to our family. Marcus wrote in handwriting that was becoming more confident and adult-like. I understand now that you were part of a group of bad people who tricked you into thinking stealing was okay. But I also understand that you chose to listen to them instead of remembering what you taught me about right and wrong. I hope that when you come home, you will be the kind of father who makes good choices and tells the truth. Diego's response to Marcus's letter was the most emotionally honest communication I had seen from him since his arrest. He acknowledged the specific ways his choices had harmed his children, expressed genuine remorse for the psychological burden he had placed on Marcus, and made commitments about the kind of father he wanted to become when he was released from prison. The exchange gave me cautious hope that family healing might eventually be possible, even if the relationships would never return to their previous innocence. The completion of restitution payments took 3 years and required Diego to forfeit most of his assets, including his home, vehicles, and retirement accounts. The financial consequences extended far beyond his prison sentence, effectively requiring him to restart his adult life with minimal resources and the burden of a federal conviction that would limit his employment opportunities. The severity of these consequences served as ongoing reminder that criminal choices had permanent repercussions that affected entire families. Kenneth Walsh died in federal prison during his 2nd year of incarceration, officially from natural causes but unofficially from the stress and health consequences of his conviction and imprisonment. His death ended any possibility of additional prosecutions or civil litigation, but it also provided a sense of closure for victims who had suffered from his criminal network. The man who had recruited dozens of children to steal from their elderly parents would never again have the opportunity to destroy families through financial fraud. The bakery business continued to thrive throughout the investigation, prosecution, and recovery period, providing both financial stability and psychological grounding during the most challenging years of my life. My employees, many of whom had worked for me for over a decade, offered unwavering support and loyalty that contrasted sharply with the betrayal I had experienced from my own son. The business relationships based on mutual respect and honest dealing proved more reliable than family relationships based on blood connection and assumed loyalty. Marcus began working part-time at the bakery during his high school years, learning business operations and developing work ethic that I hoped would protect him from the temptations that had corrupted his father. His questions about financial management, employee relations, and business ethics demonstrated a maturity and integrity that gave me confidence about the future leadership of the family business. Grandma Elena, I want to understand how you built this business so I can build something similar someday. Marcus told me during one of our working sessions as he helped prepare orders for wholesale customers. But I also want to understand how people like Dad get convinced that stealing is acceptable, so I can recognize if anyone ever tries to recruit me for criminal activities. These conversations about business ethics, personal integrity, and family responsibility became regular features of our relationship, as Marcus matured into a young man who understood the importance of moral decision-making. His experience with his father's crimes had provided him with insights about human nature and consequences that many people never acquired, giving him tools for making better choices throughout his adult life. Diego was released from federal prison after serving 3.5 years, with 6 months credited for good behavior and program participation. His return to the community was carefully managed through supervised probation that included restrictions on financial activities, requirements for continued counseling, and regular reporting to law enforcement. The transition was challenging for everyone in the family, as relationships that had been maintained through prison visits and phone calls had to be renegotiated in the context of daily life. Mama, I know that earning back your trust will take time, and I understand if it never happens completely, Diego said during his first visit to my home after his release. But I want you to know that every day in prison, I thought about the damage I caused and the lessons I need to learn. I'm not the same person who stole from you, and I'm committed to proving that through my actions, not just my words. Looking at my son across the kitchen table where Marcus had first shown me that bank statement, I felt cautious hope mixed with permanent wariness, knowing that rebuilding trust would require years of consistent behavior and genuine accountability. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.